All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Warner Historical Society's first of what we hope are many community conversations. I'm Brick Moltz, and I'm joined by Rebecca Corser, former director of the Historical Society, and Lynn Clark, the current director. And we are thrilled that you are here. And I'm going to start a screen share so you can see a bit of our presentation. And let me go here and do a quick. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So about a year ago, Royal Latouche stopped into the Warner Historical Society to suggest that it might be time to update the town history. The last town history was published in 1974, and the Society had been celebrating its 50th anniversary. And given that Warner will celebrate its sesquicentennial, that's our 250th anniversary, in the year 2024, we decided to heed his advice and get busy. So Rebecca and Lynn, Sally Matheny, Joe Bork, and I make up the Town History Book Committee. We're collecting information about life in Warner since the late 1960s to update the town history. History happens to people, and people have opinions and feelings about the events going on around them. We believe our town history will be much richer if we include your stories, opinions, and feelings, rather than relying solely on resources like newspaper clippings. So we're starting community conversations to hear your stories. Plus, it's another way, surreptitiously, for us to gather as a community and also for us to gather information. So we're starting community conversations to hear your stories. We expect that before long, we'll be able to gather in person, and that will be joyful. It's our hope that the updated Town History of Warner will be a fascinating and fun book to read, that it will be visually interesting and beautiful, and that it will capture what is vital and unique to this special place in the world. Rebecca and I will begin with a short presentation about the construction of Interstate 89, and then Lynn will open it up to your comments and questions. If you have comments or questions during the slideshow, use the chat to write them down, and we'll do our best to answer them by the end of the program, or others may help answer them. It's helpful if everyone mutes their audio during the presentation and while others are speaking. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. So in the mid-1950s, it became clear that due to the massive increase in automobile and truck traffic and the deterioration of our roads, a new system of highways was needed. In 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent a message to Congress calling for action, comprehensive and quick and forward-looking. Quote, "Together, the unifying forces of our communication and transportation systems are dynamic elements in the very name we bear, United States. Without them, we would be a mere alliance of separate parts." The benefits the president outlined would be fewer accidents, lower transportation costs, and therefore lower prices for goods, the need to mobilize defense forces and evacuate populated areas in the event of nuclear war, and the structural demands of a growing population and economy. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956 was the largest public works program in our national history and authorized the construction of a 41,000-mile network of interstate highways that would span the nation. It also allocated $26 billion to pay for them. Doesn't seem like much today. The federal government would cover 90% of the cost of expressway construction, and the states would make up the remainder. The money came from an increased gasoline tax. Over time, the interstate highway system would contribute to accelerated suburban growth, increased dependency on cars and trucks, the further decline of rail transport, The decay of urban centers increased pollution and a drastic increase in the consumption of gasoline. Between 1945 and 1960, the number of automobiles in the United States increased 133%. Interstate 89 was the result of a proposal to build a north-south route from Boston to Montreal. Technically, it's still unfinished as the A35 in Quebec does not yet connect to the border. I-89 is 191 miles long, and it connects the northern Vermont border at Highgate with Concord, New Hampshire. Most of the parts of Interstate 89 were completed in New Hampshire by 1967, and the entire route was opened by 1982. As you know, Warner has 3 exits: exit 7 in Davisville, exit 8 in Lower Warner, and exit 9, Warner Bradford. Prior to building this section, which was completed in September 1967, 2 routes were competing for adoption, one to the north of Warner and the other to the south. It was determined that the southern route would be less destructive to the town and its residents. And it was also felt that the northern route would make it less likely that travelers would visit the town center and just pass on by. So Rebecca is now going to show you some images of the construction in Warner and some of the physical changes made to the land and the homes of some of the residents. Rebecca?
For a few years, you entered and exited Interstate to Concord in front of this motel, located at the junction of Route 103 and Pleasant Lake. The motel was built by Michael and Dorothy Donovan in 1955. Several families over the years owned or managed the business. It has been known as Donovan's Pleasant Lake Motel, Totem 89, the Exit 7 truck stop, and nicknamed the No-Tell Motel. By 1979, the dining room and bar to the right was known as Danny's Restaurant. Rusty Flagg recalled that truck drivers could call in their breakfast orders on their CB radios, and by the time they had parked their trucks, the order was on the counter. In the early days, few people used the new road as it was being built, but plenty were curious about it and were known to go for a stroll along it or ride bicycles, snowmobiles, or horses. Gas cost 30 cents per gallon, and teenage boys in muscle cars with big V8 engines would test their cars at night on I-89 to see how fast they could go. This text is from Fernanda Harrington's Lost Davisville. In 1964, Joseph Bonanno, a 13-year-old boy living on the outskirts of Davisville, decided the new road, Interstate 89, provided the straightest shot into Concord. He hopped on his sky blue Schwinn Varsity and headed south, clearing miles of open road in minutes. When he reached the spectacular view west of the wide curve in Hopkinton, the Warner police caught up with him and escorted him off the highway. This text and photo is again from Fernanda Harrington's Lost Davisville. This aerial map shows the relocation of the Warner River at Bagley Field for Interstate 89. This change in the river cut off access to Alfred Hanson's hayfield. An effort was made by the public to install an underpass for accessibility, but to no avail. And it was just brought to my attention this evening, Tom Pond, which we don't see on this aerial map. The Tom Pond Association on the pond also lost a lot of acreage for the development of the highway. This aerial view shows the junction of Schoodic Road to Webster and Route 103. The white arrow points to the location of the Ernest House. The house was owned by Mrs. Marion Ernest and was torn down in 1967. The Welcome to Warner sign is located here today. Across the street was the burned shell of Blanche Littlehales. It was torn down at the same time to make way for the embankment. In Joppa, just beyond the Dalton Bridge and across from the current water treatment plant, a cottage known as Sand Hill Theater, owned by Annie Heselton, was also removed. After the Ernest house was removed, the land was leveled and used as a temporary staging area. This photograph was taken in Walt Ingalls Field, where Exit 8 off-bound ramp is located today. The covered bridge went over the Warner River. The white building in the middle is the Lower Warner Schoolhouse. The next bridge went over the railroad tracks, and just behind the bridge and barely visible is the roof line of the railroad depot for Lower Warner. In the stand of trees between the schoolhouse and the railroad bridge was the Lower Warner Cemetery, which was nicknamed Mountain Cemetery, as you had to climb uphill to reach it. This is a detailed 1967 engineering drawing from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, showing the construction plans for the Exit 8 interchange in Lower Warner, including the relocation of Route 103. This was the junction sign for Route 103 at the intersection of Schoodic Road to Webster and 103 to Kentucky. You can notice that construction on the interstate has begun. Please notice you're headed downhill when entering the Schoodic Road and approaching the cement bridges over the railroad tracks and the Warner River. This is the image just to the right of the slide we just saw. And it shows the land being cleared and the approach to the two cement bridges over the railroad and river. The White House on the hill in the background was Richard Fortune's. I want you to think about Richard Fortune's house today, and the exit ramp to get on the highway at this point is at a much higher level today than it was in this picture. This image shows the opposite view, looking back from Richard Fortune's house towards the lower village. Notice the mountain cemetery on the hill to the left of Route 103. This photograph was taken approximately from the same location as the earlier black and white image from Walt Ingalls Field. The covered bridge had been replaced by the Route 103 cement bridge, the lower bridge you see in the picture. Notice the longer span of the new bridge and how much higher Route 103 is going to be located. The entrance to Mountain Cemetery will become level with Route 103, and to my knowledge, it's one of the few cemeteries that's in a median strip in the whole United States. There was no climbing or driving up the hill to visit it. In this photo, you can appreciate the tons and tons of fill brought in to raise the road beds of 103 and Schoodic Road to the right. This is the same view. It's now completed and much more pleasing to the eye. In this black and white aerial view of Exit 8 in winter, I find the sweep of the river and the highway also pleasing to the eye. This is time to talk about a sad note to remember, which was the loss of life while constructing this route through our village. James Ivey, on the first day of construction, August 23rd, 1965, was walking the lines when he suffered a fatal heart attack. 3 months later, Nate Mock, a local and experienced woodsman, was struck by a falling tree. In September of the following year, Stuart Milner, a Weaver Brothers construction worker, suffered a heart attack on his way to work. Just 2 days later, Stephen Dondero of Amesbury, Mass., was operating a bulldozer when he lost control and it rolled over, killing him instantly. Within the month, Harold James, an employee of R.G. Watkins, was discovered on the floor of the site trailer, dead of a heart attack. This is a view from Warner Village from North Village Road. A dozen homes needed to be demolished for the construction of 89. Most of them were in the North Village area. The Turner House on Chemical Road was one of them. The Turner Blacksmith Shop to the right, the big black building, had been removed long before this project for 89, and the Ela Grist Mill had been torn down in 1945. This is a picture of the Frank Turner house. He had built his blacksmith shop and home beside Chemical Road in the 1870s. It was owned by Mr. Goodale at the time it was burned down in 1967 to make way for the interstate. In this photograph, notice that the Turner house has been removed and the site is now a staging area with a construction trailer ready to be leveled and put on site. Notice the fuel tanks under the white arrow in front of the Henniker Crutch Company. You can see that the trusses for the bridge over North Village Road have been installed. It required a large amount of blasting to remove ledge in order to build a new road up the hill to North Village. The dirt road in the foreground was used to move equipment and vehicles. For a few years after the cut had been built, the road was plagued with runoff from the ledges and a thick ice buildup on the road. After much complaining to the state and federal government and pressure by the Warner Selectmen and Representative Avis Nichols, the cut was widened and riprap placed on the embankment to solve the problem. This is from an 1877 lithograph. It's a good image to use because when you drove over the Ealer Bridge, you had three choices. The road on the left as you crossed the bridge clung to the river and passed over to the Wilby Colby farm, passing the Ealer Grist Mill and John Ealer house. The other road to the left behind the trees led uphill and was known as North Village Road. The road to the right wound up on the ridge to Snow Witch Lodge above the ski tow, which is the white building you see in the foreground. But backing up a step, this image shows the Wilby Colby Road passing between the Ealer House and Grist Mill, with the Ealer Sawmill located across the Warner River. The Ealer family sold the house to John Clemens in 1919. Alma Forsyth was the next owner in 1928, and she sold the property in 1955 to Earl and Josephine Newton. The Newtons were the owners when it was torn down in 1967. Again, this 1887 lithograph picks some of the houses located uphill on the ridge from Ealer Bridge that were also demolished, Ralph Knowlton's and Snow Witch Lodge. Lorenzo Flanders built this lovely home in 1884 on the hill overlooking the village. It had several owners through the years, but in 1947, George Mexcar purchased the property and converted it to a ski lodge during the snow train era. It stood high in the hill above the ski tow. You could put on your skis and shush to the bottom of the slope without having to get into your car. Gilman Davis built this house in 1896 and used the timber from the railroad woodshed from the main depot to build his barn. It was the next house west of the Snow Witch Lodge. It had the following owners from 1935 to 1967, Harold Croft, Frank Sylvia, and the last owners were Ralph and Edith Knowlton before, again, it was torn down. Harold and Catherine Henley, who had been living in Waterloo and operating the boarding house, the Henley, moved here into this neat bungalow. Ralph Pratt took this photograph for a postcard, and the property was known as Singing Pines because it was under the pine trees. This cape survived being relocated from Bear Pond by Sylvanus Harriman in the 1870s, only to be demolished 100 years later for the new interstate. Wind Rand was the owner at the time. Across the street, Clinton and Minnie Putnam's home was located, and again was one of the houses demolished. It was originally a schoolhouse located on the parking lot of Warner Power. It was moved to this location in the mid-1800s, probably after the brick schoolhouse was built on School Street. And of course, this was the ski tow located on Breakneck Hill. Snow Witch Lodge was located on the hill to the left where the flagpole stood on its lawn. Interstate 89 went right through the middle of the hill. The Lions Club had leased the slope from the Warner School District to offer public skiing and ski lessons to the school children taught by instructors from Mount Sunapee. The state agreed to build a new slope 2 miles to the west of town on the Chandler Reservation in lieu of paying land damages. The Lions Club, volunteers, and town organizations and businesses raised funds and donated time and materials to groom the slope, place poles, hang the rope tow, build a snack shack and outhouses, and the engine shack for operating the tow and a parking lot. The broad fields on the Warner River intervales between the village and Waterloo were often flooded in the spring and during high water events. Route 103 is located to the far right. This is now the location of the Sitco Plaza. 2 houses were removed on the intervales along Stevens Brook, Hudson's and Mrs. Dupree's. This house location would be where the northbound on-ramp is located today. Earl Nichols built a new electric sawmill and lumber yard in 1951 at the intervales. In 1970, he expanded and installed a Hosmer automatic mill, a debarker and shipping plant, and employed 10 people in 1974. Besides selling lumber, the business also made grade stakes, wood chips, and fragmented wood bark for landscaping. The vertical arrow shows the interstate bridge over Route 103. Let's see, with the increase in traffic and the potential for new businesses being located at exit 9, the town agonized over installing traffic lights or a roundabout or doing nothing. Barbara Annis, a former assistant to the selectman and then planning board member, led the fight to obtain funding to create this roundabout named in her honor in May 2019. The first businesses located here was a gas station, followed soon after by a gas station across the street, then McDonald's, followed by Demula's Market Basket. Exit 9 is one of Warner's commercial districts. Since this photograph was taken, the state liquor store has been built between McDonald's and Market Basket. Who knows what the next 10 or 20 years will bring to this area.
And with that, we'll turn it over to you. So Lynn, I'll pass the baton to you, and you can handle questions, and we'll all be here in community conversation.
Well, we didn't get any questions in the chat, so I'll open it up now. If you have a story to tell or questions, just unmute yourself, and hopefully we won't be speaking all over each other.
Hey, Lynn.
Hi, Paul.
Paul Weiler. Since I was here through a lot of the construction and lived in town prior to it, I made some notes of my thoughts going back through that time period. I do remember that all the traffic, as traffic increased to go to Mount Sunapee for skiing on weekends, my parents and my grandparents both lived on Main Street in Warner, Route 103. And if I went down to visit them early in the morning, if I didn't get back out of there by 7 o'clock, there were days that you could not back out of your driveway on a Saturday or Sunday for 20 minutes or more. And that's no, I've been in there and watched it and done it. And so, you know, the need for that 89 coming up through this corridor was certainly, I think, certainly called for at that time because of the added traffic that was going up and down those highways. That was one of the things I remember. And that would have been back around 1956, somewhere like that in that vicinity. And when I was in high school, they had built 89 starting in Bow out to exit 4, and they kept pushing north in different stages. They didn't do anything some years. It just sat there. But in the Warner area, the exit 7 at Davisville, when you're going south today to get on 89 from 103, you have a very long southbound off ramp. And a lot of people have asked me questions about that, why they had that. Well, that was the main single barrel artery to connect 89 to 103. And I've had other people say, well, we never had any, when we were talking about the roundabout, we never had any traffic signals in Warner. Well, we did for at least 5 years. Because it stopped right there at the end of that ramp and where the motel is that Rebecca was talking about. And there were lights there and all the traffic had to stop or be controlled by lights. And that stayed that way for until 1964-5 when the process beyond was pushed further north. You know, it was a lot of things that happened through that area. Because of my job that I had and because of my affiliation and being a firefighter on the fire department, I got a chance to go on to that highway. I'm not going to admit to anything that Rebecca alluded to, but I did see fast cars out there at times. And because I worked in those areas, I got a chance to know where all the pieces of it were, even when it was under initial construction. And it was a good shortcut to get up to New London for a while. Anyway, that's just a few thoughts that came to mind. You know, a lot of the properties that Rebecca referred to in the line of traffic, so to speak, or the route were removed. And those of us on the fire department at the time, the contractors came to us and wanted to know if we would burn those buildings for them rather than having to take them all apart and demolish them. So we did. We burned a number of the buildings, especially down the Depot Street area, along in that stretch right there where Ela Box used to be. Ela Box burned in '64 right in that area, but that went on, and I don't remember us getting paid for doing that, other than all we got was practice. But it worked out, and they would provide water tractors that could come in and flood it if necessary. I'll just stop right there, and I could talk about it for all night if you wanted to. But you know.
We have a question, if anyone
Sure.
can answer it, from Sarah McNeil. How were the property owners compensated for their houses being torn down and land being taken from them?
They were paid. I can't say if they got full market value, but the owners of the property were paid for that.
And nobody was relocated, I don't think, on those particular deals.
Hi, this is Sue Bartlett. Hi, all.
Hi.
Can you hear me? So I do remember learning how to drive on 89 with my father. He would get the Sunday paper and his coffee, and we would go up and down 89 when it was gravel, backing. And then later, I think Fuzzy will be able to agree with me on this. We weren't always as slow as when we were first learning how to drive. So there were some drag races, I would hazard a guess. Fuzzy Bates might have been part of it. And then the other thing I remember is when we got our dearly beloved ski tow taken away from us, which we loved. And Pete Bates was part of that. My dad, my mom, Ginny Bates, all flipping hamburgers and being a part of it. And but we did sort of move mostly seamlessly up the road. And of course, we all had a wonderful time.
And I might add that the starting mile per hour limit was 70 miles an hour. And it was that way for the first 10 or 15 years. I don't remember exactly the year that it went back to 65, but it was 70. And it was kind of a dodging game out there with a fire truck or rescue equipment with people coming at you at 80 miles an hour. But
Well, another question came in from Ben Frost. Do you know why there is only a southbound entrance and northbound exit on exit 8? Oh, well, it's Christine. Sorry, using Ben's computer.
It was a big fight just to get those two exits. I think initially, Paul might confirm this, we were only going to have exit 7 and 9 would have been 8. But there was a lot of meetings about having that on-ramp and the off-ramp there. Am I
Yes.
right, Paul?
Yes, I think so. And yes, certainly it was, because they weren't going to do it at first. But they did change it. It would have taken a lot more land to put in a cloverleaf type of exit entrance. By only having one north and one south, it eliminated that, pull them in there. So that it did save taking up a lot of land. But the state wasn't initially, as Rebecca said, too interested in doing an exit 8 there. We're glad they did.
Yeah. Peter Bates, do you have any Weaver Brothers stories you want to share?
Probably have a ton of them. I was listening to that presentation was very nice, and very truthful. And when the road crews came to Warner in the early 60s, Weaver Brothers had already completed the single two-way part of that coming from exit 6 in Kentucket that ended at exit 7. I was counting the contractors that worked on the piece of interstate up through here, up through Warner at the time. And Weaver Brothers had worked at exit 7 and then worked again just above exit 9. They had 2 pieces. I think it was a company, Warner Brothers, I think was their name.
From Massachusetts.
From Massachusetts that did a piece down by Davisville, and also north of the piece that Weaver Brothers did. Their job actually went into Sutton and went over Sutton Road and headed north. R.S. Audley did a job right off what I call Brofus's Corner on Schooldeck Road. That was a great place to watch them work, because I wasn't old enough then. I had to ride my bicycle over and see what was going on. But then the meat of the work and the pictures that somebody had taken, those were all action shot pictures coming up through Warner. R.G. Watkins did 2 jobs up through there, started right at exit 8 and went up through and ended at exit 9. And I have a gentleman sitting here with me, Tommy Fenton, sitting with me, that actually worked for RG during that whole time that the work was going on in Warner. Like I said, I was too young, but I did get involved in some of the extracurricular stuff that took place later on, why the road laid closed because it wasn't hooked to anything there. One picture that caught my eye was working right on North Village Road. Those it makes me think of how long Weaver Brothers has been around in a family involved deal. There was those 2 10-wheelers sitting in that picture loaded were Weaver Brothers 10-wheelers sitting right at the bottom of the hill when they built those 2 new bridges there. And it was sad, the part that you talked about. There was it didn't come without some loss of life, the work, but work was so much different back then. It was, as they used to say, men were men and women were glad of it. It was, them guys worked hard every day, all day long. But I don't know, Tommy's sitting here. Do you want to say anything, Tom?
Well, I don't have too much to add, but it was a lot of fun, and it paid good, and I learned a lot.
Tom, what did you do for work?
I drove truck and I run loader.
And how far did you work on Interstate 89?
New London.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Can
And
you think
we
of
had-
some of the Warner men that worked with you?
We had a job in London just beyond Palazzi's job. Palazzi did a big job up there. Yes, I can name quite a few. Charlie Bean. Eddie Ordway. Charlie Baloney. Harry Anderson. Richard Cutting. Peter Bates. Eddie Harrison. And where? Herbie Goodwin.
Is Freedom West what on the highway?
Don't think so.
Great.
Bill Fifield,
There you
Oh,
go.
that's true, yeah.
John Willie,
Yeah. Johnny, you worked out there.
I started in Davisville in 1960, when that project started in Davisville and wound up in White River Junction.
So you walked every mile of it.
I did, every 50 feet.
And you had to do that twice at Warner because they weren't sure where they were going to put it.
Right.
I remember deer hunting up there on Burn Hill, and the center line was all staked out through the woods between about halfway down Burn Hill, just above Steve Holmes's house.
Yeah.
And where was it going to come back into the alignment that it's in now?
Across Pumpkin Hill Road and then Denny Hill Road and Bartlett Loop. It was going to come, I think it was going to work where Fish and Game Club is now. I think it was coming down through there and then back toward the exit 9 area. I remember I went to all those meetings that they had with the NHDOT, and they were open public meetings at the town hall, and they got a little lively at times, as you expect they would. They made good presentations, and there may have been things such as the exit 8 configuration that came up during those meetings and prompted that construction go in that direction. So that I don't remember word for word or all the speakers, but I remember attending the meetings at the town hall and watching it going on. And you know, we were talking about workers. Tom was about workers, and he mentioned Harry Anderson, and he worked for Watkins, I believe, didn't he, Peter?
Yes, he worked for Watkins.
So I remember the week that they put in the off ramp going north at exit 8, we were down there doing a lot of pole line work in the area to get, move our facilities. And Harry was like, at the time, he was like the load dumping technician expert. And I can still see it today where he'd have his hands up in the air. Every 10-wheeler with a load of gravel, he told them where to put it and where to get the hell out of there and go get another load. And he did that every day. And I remember watching him out there, right in the hot beating sun in the middle of the summer. But that was one of the jobs he did. I'm sure he did others.
So I have a question. Were people in town generally in favor of the highway coming through?
As we came through for the general layout of the town, and the consensus of opinion was at the time that Warner was going to be a ghost town because people wouldn't stop here. They were, they had a destination, but it wasn't Warner. So it was interesting to hear different reactions from people as we measured up their houses and listened to their stories of years and years of heritage, and all of a sudden it's disappearing. So it was an interesting journey as we went through.
But as I pointed out earlier, with the traffic going to the ski slopes up there and downtown Warner was a traffic jam, I think we adjusted fairly quickly and kind of liked it when they opened this thing, opened up 89 and went to exit 9 area. At least that's what I heard from people.
Paul, do you remember who the town officials were when all the meetings and everything took place?
Well, I think it was through the 60s there. In that period, there was, of course, Charlie Hempel was one, and that was in there a long time. And later in this decade, Ted Bliss, Jim O'Rourke.
Right, Jim O'Rourke.
Got involved in it as they were selectmen as well. Ted Young. After 1970, they'd pretty well gone through our area, and then they were working up in the more in the Sutton and towards New London, that area. Our end of it was finished up there. But yeah, they were the town officials, or at least some of them at the time.
It's not relevant to anything, but Weaver Brothers did another piece up in Sutton on what I call the flats, up where the rest area is south of exit 10. And they had made a deal with the people that we were hauling gravel on, off of bought gravel from the people that were going to develop Carriage Trail Acres.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of gravel on, which would have been the west side of Stevens Brook, just north of exit 9. Well, Herb Goodwin had made the deal with, and like I said, I was just a kid and it was all hearsay, but they got in a row, the owners and Herb did, because he had bought the gravel to put on Interstate 89. They thought he had bought the gravel just to use it in Warner. Well, some of that gravel ended up in Sutton on the highway, and it was, I guess it was quite an adventure there for a couple of days. My father used to tell me about.
I have a newspaper article printed about the time of the highway being built and a couple of comments from people in town. And George Guyman, who ran the Texaco station on Main Street, said his business would be affected adversely initially, but in the long run would probably improve. Senator Representative Waldo Bigelow, owner of the Henniker Crutch Factory, predicted that in the next 5 years, Warner's population will increase by 20%. Police Chief Arthur Starkweather said that although the bypass will create some law enforcement problems, they will not be major or critical. Maurice Randall, the fire chief, says the new roads will give the department more areas to patrol and some additional problems with access, but the problems will be minor and solutions are already being worked out.
And did the population increase 20%?
By 20%? No, not in that short period of time. But you know, in 1960, Warner's population was 1,006. And I think today it's close to 3,000.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And if you read the history, Warner at one time was about 2,400, I think, maybe.
In 1820.
1820.
Yeah.
And then the low point was when I graduated from high school. It was like just over 1,000.
I got a little tidbit here. This is Ron and Carol from 1966. I was on active duty in the Navy, and I came home to visit my new son, was born in August, and I went down to watch him down there at right around North Village Road. They were down there working, building the overpass and whatever. And just sitting there, just kind of watching the guys, and this fellow walked up to me. I assume he was a foreman from Watkins. He offered me a job. I said, gee, I'd love to, but I'm already committed. I'm in the Navy. I'm home on leave. That was pretty cool. I'll never forget that.
You know, my father was pretty much a rabble rouser, and I think he probably added to the heat of some of those meetings. He was really a staunch defender of Alfred Hansen being able to get an underpass, and he was a staunch defender of the on and off ramp there at exit 8. But at the same time, he sold a lot of sand and gravel for the construction of 89.
As well as Earl Nichols.
Yeah,
Roy Gookin.
Yep.
So yeah,
Roy-
there's a lot of borrow pits.
I remember the crushing plant they had up where Market Basket is now. That thing was huge. And that was all woods when I first came to Warner. Now it's a, shopping mall / gravel pit, whatever. But they took a lot of stuff out of there.
That pit was 1.5 miles long.
Yeah, well, see, Pete knows.
This is Peter Bates again. I'm going back to the pictures that was down the bottom of Mill Street when they showed them working on the bridges. In that picture, there was a concrete batch plant set up there, temporary plant, and then Watkins had a crusher set up where the mill was. Like Ronnie said, they also had a hot dog plant set up there. They
Yep.
made all the hot dog for the work that they did right out on the highway. It came right out of that pit. There was, like Rebecca said, Scudic Road, you didn't want to drive on it unless you had to, because there was 10-wheelers everywhere. And they were coming mostly from coarser land. Fred did sell a lot of material. and they had a crusher set up. Oddly had the crusher set up right at the end of Coochtown Road in that field of courses. That vein of gravel there is out on the highway somewhere.
We have
Just a-
another question from Anthony Mento. Can someone talk about Waterloo Street at exit 9? Did it once run through and connect with 103?
Yes.
Paul, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, that used to, 103 went up through what is now Waterloo Road.
Yeah.
Until 1957. In 1957, the state relocated 103 to where it is now, which put you in line to go into the transfer station and the state highway garage and so forth. That was done in 57. And then the old Route 103 was given to the town, I guess, from the state. There was an interesting relocation up there. Roy Silver and his wife owned a business on what is now Waterloo Road on the right-hand side. I can't think of the name of the people that live there now. But they had a Flying A gas station, and they had other ice creams and other groceries and so forth. So when they relocated the road 103 in 1957, instead of I don't know how they worked it out. I guess but they had to relocate that business because they were taking it away from that mainstream. So they moved it up onto the hill, and that's how that one had a curved driveway in and out, so you could get gasoline, newspapers, whatever you need to get. But yeah, that was all 103 up through to the Sutton Town line. It was relocated there.
A woman who had a little income from all of the workers working on 89 was Mrs.
That's me.
Bauman, who her house was where the Brodericks live, across from Braeside Apartments. And she had luncheons every day for workers right out of her house.
Donnie knows about that. He probably had a few lunches there, didn't you, Don?
Yeah, she was very gracious. She was a wonderful cook too, Gert was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the dooryard was full every day, and it was a big meal, and everybody enjoyed it. So, there were those that recouped from it a little bit from the road.
Bradbury, the last name.
I'm sorry, I said Bowman. That was her daughter, Bradbury, right?
Yeah.
I got a question for Dawn. Remember your bunny boots, Dawn?
The what, Ronnie?
The bunny boots.
Yeah,
Those big insulated boots you guys wore when you were out
Yeah.
working in the winter?
the Mickey Mouse boots.
Yeah, bunny
roll-up
boots,
ones.
Mickey Mouse boots, they were huge. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, to tag along with that, I probably wouldn't be in Warner today if it wasn't for the DOT surveying this road. And Donnie worked with my best friend in high school, Roger Ranlett. And I met my wife through Roger down here at Boughton's. It was a long time ago. A little history.
Mountains is where the foothills was.
Yep.
Right. Did I see Diane Goodwin on here?
He was.
You did. I'm here.
Okay. Do you have any stories about your dad, who was Herb Goodwin for Weaver Brothers?
You know, all I remember, I bet Fuzzy remembers this. I remember my sister Debbie getting rousted by the police down at exit 6. They used to sneak down there when we first moved to Maple Street, and they used to sit down by the where 6 comes off to Maple Street, where we lived at the time. She was down there with a bunch of friends smoking cigarettes, and it was a huge to do. The police car came to the house and all that, and so that's one. I guess that's sort of one of my memories of '89. And I also remember my dad telling me when we were learning how to drive, we were on the highway in one of those big cars he used to drive. I never got to drive a pickup, but he always had like a Cadillac or a Lincoln or some huge tank of a car. And we drove along, and I was brand new at driving. And he took that moment to describe to me how at some point, maybe during construction or when the road first opened, that he was going along one evening driving, I think, up towards New London, and that someone was driving down the wrong barrel straight past him and passed him in the other lane, passed him in the passing lane going south. He said he didn't speak for a few minutes. He just sort of took it all in. And after he told me that, you know, I never drive that stretch of road, even to this day, without thinking that somebody might get on the exit going the wrong way. But yeah, I do remember '89 pretty well. And we lived right off the '89 in Maple Street we did, we and all the kids did at the time. So yeah, I remember that pretty well. Yeah. And I didn't know until Fuzzy mentioned it tonight that they were thinking about ever having '89 up near Burnt Hill. I had no idea that any of that would have happened up at what I still refer to as Dad's house. So.
Yeah, there were a number of those wrong way drivers which the state finally figured something they had to do. So they made all the signs that say wrong way. But before that out there would be people that would be confused in one way or another who would take the wrong lane. It could be quite, I saw some really bad accidents out there. Head on.
I'll tell you, it scared me straight, that's for sure.
we were fortunate one day. This will put a smile on Peter's face. We witnessed Herbie Goodwin at his finest because one of his rock trucks came down one day and he was hauling 3 telephone poles behind him with the wire still hooked to it.
That's great.
Needless to say, Herbie was in his prime that day.
I've seen that happen before.
Did he promote him, Don?
No, he went down the road with his lunchbox in his hand.
I saw that on 106 back in '89.
This is Nancy Ladd. I have a memory as a child summer visitor. And when we came to visit my grandparents who lived in Warner, Helen Ladd, or they were seasonal at that time, I think too, but they used to lend us a convertible to use for the summer. We had a place up at Mink Hill Farm off North Village Road. And it must have been late 60s maybe, and the only section that was complete was to someplace in Hopkinton. I don't know if it was exit 6 or exit 7 that it was finished to from Concord. And my mother used to take me into Concord when she had errands to run and let me poke around in Concord, which was a very small place then. And coming back, she decided she'd try out that new section of highway instead of staying on 103. And being in a convertible, my hair was whipping around. And so I was wearing a bandana to keep my hair down and it blew off somewhere on the highway. So, of course, I screeched and my mother stopped the car, looked all around. There was not a single car on that highway section. And she backed all the way up and let me get out of the car and pick it up. That's my only memory of 89 in the early years. I'd like to know which year that was. It must have been, I don't know, 66 or 67. Maybe Donnie knows when that section was finished.
To back up Paul's statement about the traffic backing up in the village, I can remember coming home on weekends once in a while, and traffic will be backed up from George Guyman's garage well beyond where Paul's father lived, waiting to buy gas and cigarettes to go back to Massachusetts after leaving Sunapee. I mean, I would have to time my return trip back to Rhode Island around that traffic jam. It was unreal. That was before 89 was open. George Guyman made a lot of money selling cigarettes and gasoline. He used to open up on Sundays at 2 o'clock just to accommodate those people. And one of the persons that worked there was Roger Durgan.
Yeah, and I used to work part-time for George Guyman when I was in high school, and he used to take us to, they had dealers meetings and dinners. So every now and then he'd ask one of the guys to go with him. And I don't remember exactly the year. It must have been around 1957 or 58. All the dealers were giving their reports of how much gas they'd pumped. And George had the highest figures for just about anybody at the meeting. He was pumping more gas at his garage than they were in the main street of Nashua. Outselling the city of Nashua. That's how busy it was. It was crazy.
And it was full service.
Yeah, we pumped. We were the pumpers. People didn't have to get out of the car.
No. Wash the windows, check
Wash
the
the
air, the
windows.
tires, check the oil. Full service.
I was working there one night, probably around 1959, and we worked till 9 o'clock and then closed down. And George, it was good 9 o'clock, so George came over to take readings on the pumps and stuff. And he pulled the covers off, the panels off the front. And I said, "What are you doing? You got a problem?" He said, No, I'm going to change the price. I said, "Oh, no, really?" Well, it was 28.9 at the time. It went down to 27.9. I'm telling you what, that was great for us young fellas getting around. Because what we used to put all of our coinage that we got, spending money together, and say, "Okay, how much money we got there? We got $1.75. We can pay the answer for 75 cents." It's crazy. That's the lowest I ever saw. It was 27.9. I'm sure maybe there were others that saw it lower than that. He did a heck of a volume of business, and we had like, I don't know, 5 filling stations in town in different directions, because we had city service and Texaco, Exxon, a bunch of them.
Rebecca, another name to add to that list of locals is Bud Ellsworth.
Okay,
He was a resident engineer on a couple of those jobs out there.
good.
Bud Ellsworth was an engineer for the state.
Nancy Eastman? Do you have any memories?
I don't.
You don't, okay.
The only memory I have is about which side the highway was going to go. Because if it went on the other side, it would affect some of my parents' land, I believe.
Yeah, we're going up.
But I was focused on getting out of town and being better than a Warnerite. So the road didn't really matter much to me. I did like it because it made the trip, when we could use parts of it, I used to get car sick. So it made the parts when they were open going into Concord easier for me. But that's my only memories. I didn't drag race or anything because I was going to be bigger and better, you know.
How'd that work out for you?
I finally smartened up.
You came home.
Yeah. I think this has been great, though. It's brought back a lot of memories for me, just people's names that you've been talking about, or the houses, or it's good.
So I'm Chris Hager, and I do have a memory of Route 89 because I was a summer resident of Melvin Mills in the 1960s, and I came of age at learning to drive just at the time that Route 89 opened up. And my dad used to take me on Waterloo Road to, you know, teach me to drive. And I used to hate that because it was curvy and a lot of frost heaves, and it was really freaking me out. But then I said I really wanted to try this new highway. And after a few days on Waterloo Road, he let me go on to the brand new highway, and it was so exciting. It just my first highway experience, learning to drive, and there was practically no other cars on it, so I felt like I owned the whole road. It was quite a memorable experience for me at the time.
Thank you.
Rebecca, it's Peter Russell.
Yes.
You know, I'm not a Warnerite, and I lived in Hopkinton for 45 years, and it's just really fun to sit here and look at all these guys that I've known forever. You know, I moved to Hopkinton in 1970, so I didn't see any of that construction. However, I spent a lot of time on I-89, both north and southbound. Worked with Paul a lot, and all those other guys that I'm seeing you talk with there. So this has really been special for me. Thank you very much.
Great. That's good.
Any more questions or stories?
No, but I want to thank you. We got to do this again.
We will.
You know, hearing all of this and being 20 years old, it really makes me think, you know, about all the memories and, you know, all the chaos that went into this.
Thank you.
How come Donnie looks so comfortable sitting there, you know, all leaned back on his sofa? The only thing he doesn't have is a drink in his hand. I don't understand.
All those miles I walked from Davisville to White River Junction.
Hey, Peter, thanks for turning on your picture there so we can see you.
Is it not on?
It is now.
Oh, well, actually, it has been on. I just haven't said anything. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little thing about Donnie and the surveying, and one of the guys that worked with him, like I said, was my high school best friend. And 89 went through some of the best damn rabbit hunting country there was in Warner and Sutton. That's you know, you could hunt rabbits, you didn't even need a dog, you know, but that's you know, it's gone now, but
We saw a lot of wildlife as we went up through because we had to park along the North Road and walk in before the road, they started construction. So in some places it was quite a hike to get from the North Road into the north and southbound barrels.
yeah.
So at the end of the day, you knew you'd done something.
I can remember Roger taking me up there and saying, this is the center line of the northbound lane. You know, we'd be up there hunting. So it was something I'll never forget.
I have a question for Fuzzy. Has the technology changed at all in the last 50 years that Weaver Brothers has been working on these highways?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything else, along with the technology, the cost of building a piece of highway is astronomical compared to what it was back in the day. But technology is GPS technology and UTS technology changes how the survey is done and how it's used. No grade stakes, no grade foreman really. The survey parties, they still have to survey the road, but they don't pull a steel tape and put something in the ground at 50 feet anymore. It's all in a computer.
GPS.
Yeah, and it's also in a lot of the equipment. The machine controllers and all the equipment that you can take somebody, if they can make the bulldozer move, they can grade if they can read a computer screen.
We have a comment in the chat box from Anthony Mento. It says, Jesse McNeil and I have wondered for years why Route 89 was so twisty. Well, now knowing that Don Hall was responsible answers that.
Don, you're gonna let him get away with that?
I'll take some punishment somewhere. It was an experience, believe me.
Well, I hope you'll join us again. We're going to do these conversations periodically throughout the coming probably a couple of years. If you have a topic that you want to hear us talk about, please just email me at the office. Some of the ones that we've come up with have been women's health care, community action, military service, because we're looking especially at the era from like the late 60s through to the present. So the Vietnam War is probably going to loom pretty large in people's memories, and as well as what's happening recently in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The Simon School, just conservation, recreation in town, lots of different things that we'd love to hear people's recollections and opinions about. The very next one we're going to do is at the end of March, and it'll be about Indigenous peoples in Warner. So if you have any stories about, any objects you found, I read that there were carvings up on Mount Kearsarge, and we'd love to know if anyone's ever seen them. But we'll be joined by some folks from the Abenaki Trails project that's going on right now. So it'll be a mix of the past and the present, and we'd love to hear any stories that you folks have as well. So keep an eye out for those, and we hope you'll join us. And as I said, send us your ideas too, because this is great.
It's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks.
Welcome.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.